and then waiting for it to appear on the YouTubes. But hello, everyone. This is Reija. You are on my channel, The Book Finch, and today is another lovely time for a Shorts and Sorcery Book Club live stream. And I am joined by my lovely friend and co-host Joe to talk about Love After the End, an anthology of two-spirit and indigiqueer speculative fiction, and this is edited by Joshua Whitehead. So today we will be talking about this anthology. But before we get started, Joe, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what's going on your channel and what do you usually talk about?
Yep. Obviously, I'm Joe. My channel has my name in it. It's FinalBlowJoe. I am a very heavy science fiction reader. About 60% of what I read every year is science fiction, with a certain amount of fantasy, thrillers, and crime and that sort of thing thrown in. Although I read almost everything apart from YA and classics, which don't work for me very well. And my channel is mostly wrap ups nowadays and reviews, lots of reviews.
And since you are all on my channel, you probably know that I talk a lot about, different kinds of books, but mostly science fiction and fantasy especially. And also I talk a lot about comics. And the reason why I started this book club reading anthologies and magazines was because I wanted to branch out more into short fiction, especially because I am trying to get more in tune with the Hugo reading and Hugo voting and stuff, and it behooves oneself to be more on the map when it comes to what is out there in terms of short fiction. And I also want to encourage other people to read more diversely, and that is why I try to pick books for the book club that are more eclectic and more varied in terms of the ideas and authors that they include. So, with that said, let's talk about Love After the End. Before we get into the meat of the thing, our favorite and least favorite stories, let's talk a little bit about our general reading experience and expectations. First of all, Joe, was it easy to get your hands on this book?
Well, I read it on my Kindle, so it was just an ebook purchase. So that is a really nice cover, by the way, because obviously with an ebook, you see I've got it on my Kindle, which is black and white, so covers are virtually non-existent as far as I'm concerned with ebooks.
This book also has two different editions because it was first published by an independent press, which I think currently is defunct, and they had a more cartoonish sort of cover. And this is by another re-release by a small press that released it under Discover. And I basically got it from the library. So in that sense, it was actually really interesting that, being from Finland, I wouldn't necessarily think that this type of book would turn up in our library. So, but I always try to look in our library first just to see hey, what if? And they got it. So it was actually kind of interesting. Also, it has the rainbow sticker on it because all the library books that have LGBTQ plus themes have rainbow stickers to signify that they are they have queer themes, which I think is a nice touch. What were your general expectations? What sort of themes were you expecting of this book? When you first thought that, okay, I'm gonna read it and I'm gonna pick it up, what kind of not prejudices but sort of expectations and maybe wishes you had that this book would tackle?
Well, obviously by the name, it's got what's the subtitle? It's an indigiqueer collection, I think. Is it?
Yeah, an anthology of two-spirit and indigiqueer speculative fiction.
So I knew it'd be a little bit different compared to normal short story collection. Obviously, the focus of the characters is going to be characters that don't identify as
Straight or
yeah.
cis.
I mean, and I was expecting something just obviously the focus to be on that with obviously the storylines to sort of match it in some way. Really.
Yeah, I personally kind of stuck to the love aspect. I was expecting maybe stories that were more like hopeful, especially because it's like love after the end. So basically, you like this idea of an apocalypse or like a cataclysmic event, and then sort of this hopeful, like what comes after sort of
Yeah.
thing. So that was what I personally was expecting, like this sort of like love and hope after after something devastating has happened. Um, were your expectations met?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I mean, I certainly didn't have that one though because I thought, well, it says love after the end, but I was like, well, I wasn't expecting it to be excessively romantic in that sense. I thought it'd be more just, I mean, yes, romantic in a way, but not like overly so because after all, it is more like people being able to express themselves differently after the end, after this world altering event, and it does do that because the characters are able to be themselves more. I mean, there's certainly a few stories there that are darker, where they get. I mean, still horrible discrimination. So I'd say yeah, it certainly met and lived up to what I thought it would contain.
I think that for the most part, I got what I was expecting, but I personally wasn't expecting that this would be as dark as it was. Like some stories were really dark, and I maybe was expecting something a little more like light,
Yeah,
and I definitely had to like adjust my expectations after like the couple first stories. Like okay, like why did I think that those stories were the kind of stories that I like was expecting to see, you know? And why does it sort of like rattle me that
yeah,
the topics are darker? So I definitely had to do some kind of like adjusting and looking in the mirror in that sense. But I think that's a very good segue also to move forward to talking about the actual stories. So first, let's talk about the stories that did not work for us. Like,
mm,
and then we can talk about our least favorites and end in a sort of positive note with the stories that we most enjoyed. So, do you want to start? What is one story that you did not enjoy as much as some of the others?
well, one that I remember the name of it, and because although I remember my comment because I can't because my thoughts on it were so well unknown. I mean, I can't even remember the story. That's how little it meant to me, and that was "How to Survive the Apocalypse for Native Girls" by Kar Minash Pyle. I mean, my comment was the first story that I didn't really get. I mean, I can't actually remember the plot line of this one like whatsoever. It
Yeah,
didn't leave an impression on me.
I
For me.
feel like because that was also one of my less favorite stories, and I think the reason why I didn't find myself connecting to it as much was because it was well first of all it is a kind of epistolary story. It is following this person's journal entries, and they are first of all kind of editing themselves,
Yeah,
thinking about well what it's kind of meta in a sense, like they're thinking about like things that well how would the like viewer or rather reader, how does what kind of information does the audience need, and what kind of information should be parted onto them. So the sort of narrator of the story is constantly thinking about that. So they're
yeah,
also like taking things out of the narration, and the execution of the story is therefore kind of choppy. It kind of like has these scenes and then it moves on to the next scene, and they are connected and they're following an overarching thing, but it runs the risk, and I think that risk was there for us
Yeah.
because we found ourselves not really connecting or getting it, is that it feels so disjointed.
Yeah. Fractured.
Yeah,
It felt like separate chapters without that little bit of extra that just connects them properly.
yeah. I personally felt that there was like every time there was a shift to another kind of point in the story, I got pulled out of the story a little bit, and then I have to kind of like try to re-immerse myself, and that is why um, I wasn't as moved by it. Whereas I think that the actual because if you think about it, the fractured nature of the story kind of makes sense, because if you're thinking about this idea that it's about people, first of all, having to leave their home and sort of also working in the confines of this society that has very strict rules. Like, this is a story about these kinship laws and stuff, and it's also a story about who these kinds of groups exclude and include. So in that sense, thematically, the fractured nature of the story makes sense, but I think on an execution level, I just didn't enjoy
Yeah.
it as much. Like, the writing of the characters, like I like I felt this about a bunch of stories in this collection where I was like, oh, I like these ideas. The ideas are very neat and interesting, but then something about the execution was like, well, okay, just didn't grab me in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but there's always, like I always say, any short story collection, it's rare that the short story collection where every story works well. They occasionally do. Most have got a few that fail in some way to catch your attention, a few that just, really do work out phenomenal.
Another story that I found that, especially after reading a bunch of the others, this was one of the early stories. It was the very first story after the introduction, was Abacus by Nathan
Advocate.
Adler. I thought when I was reading this that it was fine, but then in retrospect, after reading some of the other ones, this one started to kind of like, on retrospect, it became less good, if that makes sense. Like it didn't change my view of the original stories, but the other stories kind of felt more elevated.
Yeah.
So then it kind of caused this one to kind of just sink into the bottom when I was comparing it to the other stories that I was reading. Um, and also, I just maybe this was one of those stories that was maybe most a love story compared to any other story in this collection. I think that this one was an actual love story.
Yeah.
Um, but I just didn't really get behind the main couple.
Yeah, it was I mean, I was expecting an alternative, but not quite that alternative.
It was odd. Also, I didn't like, one of the things that kind of took me out was that I didn't understand the constraints and limitations of the world, because you're talking about characters that exist in both real life space where they are human and
Yeah.
rat, but then they exist in a virtual space where they are both like have human avatars, but they can interact with each other and sort of touch each other. And how does that correlate with them touching in real life? Like, I was confused about the limitations and constraints. Like, how does this work? And that kind of made me kind of pull back from the story.
Yeah.
But it also had some neat ideas, like this idea of biological AIs. Like that's another thing. I don't know what goes into making a biological AI. The story doesn't really delve deep.
No.
It just wants you to have this, like, I was thinking about, like, one thing. I was thinking about the ethical, like, concerns about, implanting an AI into a rat.
Yeah.
Doesn't that erase the rat? Like it's
Oh,
still a living being. What
yeah.
happens to the rat consciousness? It
Suppressed
was,
or removed.
yeah, I like it. I just like it, that part of it really, like, I thought it was really dark. Like, I'm like, am I the only one thinking about this? Like, is the rat just kind of gone? Is the rat dead? But it's now like a vessel for an AI.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of creepy. But yeah, that was one that I wasn't a huge fan of. Did you have another one that you wanted to talk about in this category?
Um, Not really that stood out. I mean, I would think that because that that one because was and like I said, it wasn't that it wasn't good. It's just all the others felt like they had a slight not similarity of theme, but something that sort of worked from story to story. This felt a little bit different. I mean, I suppose being the first story, sort of getting into the sort of pace of it. I think that might be what threw us and
Yeah,
the sound of it everybody else.
but also, like, the first story kind of sets the tone and pace of the whole
Yeah,
anthology. Like, the first story is like, this is your introduction to the whole collection, and sort of like that. That's why it's kind of like if you go to a comedy show or like that has multiple, like, people in the lineup, or a concert or something, and the opening act will determine the entire tone and pace of the thing, and then and the last act will be the thing that you kind of remember, so this is kind of like a sort of interesting choice for an opener, because I don't think there are any other stories like this one, both like in terms of tone and in terms of like even um like themes. um like, this is a very unique
yeah,
story in this whole collection. I think the one that comes closest to Abacus is actually Seed Children by Mari Kurisato. It also deals with like these sort of synthetic people and AI,
yeah,
and that also kind of, I felt a little like similar thought in terms of like ethics in that story that I did in Abacus, because it's like, well, this is a synthetic human being, or a synthetic being person, and they are programmed as being part of this like culture.
yeah,
So that's kind of like, well, who's the programmer? Who decides how this, like what sort of aspects of the culture are programmed into this being? And that kind of makes me, well, like the sort of ethical and moral dilemmas surrounding that kind of were on the top of my mind as I was reading this, and therefore I couldn't really um, empathize or relate to the main character, the main point of view character, because I was constantly like thinking about the way she was supposed to be like operated, built, and programmed. I was
yeah,
constantly thinking about the background element that we weren't told as readers. But I kept thinking about it because I thought that it was a huge like blind spot in the story that the author doesn't delve too deep, whereas I
yeah.
think it's actually a very, very crucial element of this character's whole concept.
Yeah, I mean, Three Children was actually one that I quite liked. So
I thought it was interesting.
that's a really interesting idea, especially the you know, sort of essentially. I don't know if it's meant to be that, but to me, I couldn't help thinking of the the whole idea of the world tree
Yeah,
and
yeah.
spreading to the stars. Color.
Yeah, I thought that like that's another thing. Like I kept thinking like is the spaceship like is it actually a seed that was grown by by the tree, or was it like just a sort of symbolic seed?
Yeah,
Um, like it had interesting ideas. I just like most of the time I don't think that the stories I liked less were necessarily bad stories. I just felt that the execution of them wasn't necessarily as polished as some of the stories that I really did end up loving.
yeah.
Which would bring us to the actual stories that we did love. I have a few, but do you want to go first? What is one of the stories that was your personal like favorite, like cream of the crop in this particular collection?
Hmm. Um, I mean, should we mention one that everybody that liked, everybody read the book liked?
Oh yeah, well
Yeah, Darcy
that
Little,
would be
Darcy Little
stop
Badger.
for a bottle. Darcy Little Badger.
Yeah, still think
Everyone
that.
in the group basically was like, "This is
Yeah,
the one," and
very
I
much.
think for good reason. I think that this story actually, like Darcy Little Badger's story, gave us an idea. Like, okay, there has been a huge like climate change event, which has caused certain people like rich people and whatnot to like do these like prepper end of the world vessel things, but then the end of the world didn't happen, and it manages to tell us that pretty organically through the course of the story, like what was the expectation. There was an expectation of the world ending, and then some people kind of ran off in their little like private um end of days utopia paradises, these sort of floating cities you could call
Yeah,
them, and then the world didn't end, and other people that were left behind kind of just moved on, and nobody knew about these preppers that were out there. And it's also a kind of horror story and a survival story in a sense,
yeah,
and it has a very open end, but it just manages to juggle so many things, and it does it in a like this I think was one of the more fully realized stories in terms of concept, execution, and characterization, and that's
yeah.
why I think I
It's
liked it
balanced,
so much.
very well balanced.
But that said, I also think that you could really expand on this story and this story idea and make it a full novel.
Oh yeah, easily.
And I actually kind of want that. Like if Darcy Little Badger ever gets bored and is like, "Oh, I'm gonna revamp one of my older stories. I will be there first in line." Like, please let it be this one because I want to know all the things, and especially like, or rather like have a point of view about the people that get left behind when the main character of this story is like taken to the like prepper vessel. Like what happens
Yeah,
on with her family? Like do they look for her?
yeah.
Like I just think that this has so many interesting possibilities that could be looked
Oh
at.
yeah. I mean, like why was she left, and how has she been there so long? It's a
Yeah,
bit.
how did the antagonist survive? like
Oh
like is are they like I know that it alludes to this idea of them like kind of tampering with their physics physicality and like biology to kind of extend their own life, but still it's like there's so many things that could be explored.
yeah,
I really loved it, but then again I like Darcy Little Badger has not let me down once. so far, and I'm so excited every time I see her name in a book. I'm like, okay, I need to read that. One other story that I really liked was the very last one, Eloise, by let me see, David A. Robertson. And it wasn't a perfect story, but I thought that it had like really interesting ideas, like very Black Mirror-esque, even though I kind of despise the comparison to Black Mirror at this point, but like it was very that. And Joe, if someone gave you this opportunity that, okay, if you just put the blinds on and go into this like virtual reality world to experience something that you could have, would you take the opportunity, spend 50 years in some virtual game world to
Oh,
experience stuff and then come back out?
no, because that's just not, see, what makes us who we are is the fact that we are mortal. If
Mm.
you're going to be living these experiences in ultra fast time by actual standards, but in this sort of mental world, then yeah, you'll have interesting viewpoints, but it's not. I don't know. To me, it wouldn't be the same. At least, you know. Well, obviously, then it'd be different if that was an option. If it was an option, you might think differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this story ultimately is about. Uh, Eloise, is about escaping and not
Yeah,
facing reality, essentially, because essentially what all the like people who are using the technology gate, which lets them experience something um ultra fast, like you will go for 5 minutes to this thing, and then 50 years will have passed in your mind, and then you have to kind of reacquaint yourself with the world before you return, so to speak. And there was this one scene. Uh, hello, Julia. Lovely to see you here.
cool.
Um, but there was this one scene in the cafe when the main character sees the mother and son, and the mother is like I can't like forces the son to like use the thing,
Yeah,
and we don't really know what the background is. It's just that the mother doesn't want the son to be a certain way and wants them to be something else, essentially.
yeah,
And I just got kind of like this, it wasn't explicitly stated, but I got sort of like this idea of like conversion therapy, or like a similar thing. Like,
yeah,
okay, you go experience those things that you want to like experience in virtual reality in your head, and then when you come back out of there, you can be the son that I want. So you have kind of had your fun, and now you can be normal, quote unquote. That's sort of the reading I got, but maybe it's just because I'm a queer person, so that's kind
no,
of.
I thought that my thought was like, yeah, sort of some sort of like psychological molding. It's
Yeah.
like it's like, right, I will put you in this situation and I will manipulate the scenario, the world that you're in. Therefore, your mind will, your views, your opinions will be skewed in a very specific way. It's like that is forcibly trying to,
Yeah.
you know,
And it's also like it brings in a lot of
constantly.
these ethical questions and
Oh
moral
yeah,
questions, because we also, in that story, we see the creator of the technology, and clearly she didn't want the technology to be used that way, but there are people who use it in ways that she did, and she even says that there are people who use it in a way that she didn't mean it to be used, which kind of like brings in the idea that this was the intent, but this was the actual impact of the invention. I thought that it was interesting. Um, I just basically the whole main struggle of the thing, where this other person is like, well, I didn't call her, so I'm living in this virtual reality and like trying to forget about this girl that I could have had a relationship with, but didn't because I was a coward, in a sense. That's what I got. But I'm like, I don't know this character well enough to establish a deeper connection. So we only see the point of view of the character who got left behind, who didn't get the call, and how she is viewing this gate technology and stuff. And I just like, I feel like I was so invested and interested in the whole technological concept of the gate technology, but I wasn't almost at all invested in the actual characters. And yet still this was one of my favorite stories.
It was a very interesting one for obviously the ethics morality of it, and was obviously asking the reader what you said. Would you consider it if you were there, sort of thing?
I mean, there definitely are scenarios where I could consider like doing that. Especially like I'm very like conflict averse person. So I feel like in terms of like, seeing like, okay, what are all the options that I need to know, like navigating this situation with this person, I might dabble in that if that was an option. As I said, I feel like the main theme of this story was this kind of escaping and avoiding situations where you might end up being disappointed. At least from the like main character's like love interest standpoint, that was definitely a thing. Or in terms of the grandma, we don't really know what she was looking at, but it could be like one of those situations where she's like reliving something. So there's a lot of like things that could be explored in this story. Did you have another favorite?
Hmm. Uh,
I'm looking at the contents page here so that I
yeah,
know what I'm seeing. I feel like another one that really left an impression of me on me was History of the New World by Adam Garnett Jones, which had the two mothers and a daughter.
that one.
Mm.
Yeah, I thought I liked it. I thought it was quite powerful, but it didn't. I just thought it was quite beef. I felt it was more of just like a little personal character development story, and then it was over, and it didn't stay with me as much.
I felt like it had. I like the family dynamic in it. I like that it was a story about two mothers who had a very messy relationship with each other, like this very like conflict heavy and like argumentative relationship, and them trying to navigate this changing world with completely polar opposite opinions. Um, and raising a child together. I thought that was very neat. I thought that the way it described this sort of hellscape that the world has turned into, and where people are moving into another dimension essentially, or another place, and how that looks for the people who get left behind. Like what does it mean for the world resources, and how things in this old world are getting sort of dismantled and repurposed and sent off to the other place is kind of like interesting as well. But the thing that kind of rubbed me the wrong way was this idea of bioessentialism, because this idea that okay, one of the mothers has been the one who carried the child full term, and the other mother is the person who actually like is the biological mother of the child by donating the egg. And it kind of puts a rift between these parents, like okay, if you are not the biological parent of this child, then you are kind of the lesser in a sense. And then it sort of turns like the other mother into an antagonist.
Yeah.
And the sort of emotional connection um, between the mother and the child is sort of ignored and just hand waved when she in the end out of nowhere is like, well, I will miss her, and I wish she was here with us. But that wasn't at all the like vibe you get when you are reading the story, because she is like kind of a the child character is kind of another vessel for the other main character's voice. Like she's another way of the that character to like voice her point of view, which I thought was interesting. Still, I like this story. I just was very annoyed by this one aspect.
Yeah, and it's certainly an interesting, obviously, considering, you start with Albert, then it goes to that. So it's quite thematically, it's quite, I feel like it's light, and then it suddenly gets a lot darker.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting
Especially,
combination.
yeah, in the end, because they're like, okay, what like things happen in that new world, and you're kind of like, like.
Yeah, it's bad, and it's like.
But it's also kind of like maybe I kind of wanted to see what happened in the new world as well. Like I was like, oh, there's this new world, there's this new place that the people are going, and then we don't actually ever go there, and we don't see what it's like there. We just hear stories about it, which can be interesting if the framing device, the framing story, was more interesting than the snippets of the new world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm still saying that I really like this story. It's interesting though. I feel like every story I read in this collection was something that I was like, okay, this is giving me a lot of thoughts. I'm like having all these ideas when I'm reading these stories, but also there are things that I am like I want to unravel as I'm dissecting and thinking about these stories, which I actually think that makes this actually a pretty good collection to read, because
It was.
like you want an anthology to have those moments where you kind of start to pick your brain when you're reading the stories. Like I find that the last collection that we read, the Book of Dragons, I found that the stories that I enjoyed the most were the ones where I could have these sorts of thought exercises and think more deeply about the way the story was written and told.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice, Julia. I hope you I hope you will join us for some of the book club reads. Hopefully I'm also going to be having another announcement soon, because I have already planned the book picks for May, June, and July. So I should have some announcements on what those will be. And I think that if you have seen, for example, my or any of my BookTube SFF friends anticipated releases video for 2022, you will know what the May pick will be, possibly because that book just came out. But I will keep you in anticipation until I actually get that announcement out. But yeah, Joe, did you like this collection?
I did. I mean, obviously, I didn't have entirely that many expectations, other than it being alternative points of views with interesting stories, and lived up to that. So it did work overall, and and even the story that didn't work as well. I mean, even the How to Survive the Apocalypse 4-Day Girl, the one that I didn't really get. The fact that I can actually remember the name of it, even though I didn't get it. Frankly, something by itself. I mean, normally if something doesn't work, then I forget the name of it. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm notorious for having a pretty terrible memory, especially with like, for example, character names and stuff. But I feel like I can still remember the basic concept and overall plot of practically all of these stories. Like if I look at the content list, basically the only story in this whole, like if I remember Abacus, well, that was the love story between a rat AI and a person. History of the New World. Two mothers with opposing views and conflicting ideas about like whether to relocate or to like live in the world and try to course correct what they already have instead of packing things up and moving to another place. The only one that I look at and I'm like, okay, I can't remember this as well, is the arc of the turtles back. But every other story in this, like how to survive the apocalypse for native girls, like navigating the idea of like the indigenous life and indigenous society and who gets excluded and included in those societies and kind of fighting against that and leaving instructions and like documentation for future generations to kind of navigate through those conflicts. Andvani Gachigan about stories, about like who gets to tell stories, who gets silenced, and the importance of parting wisdom and parting stories to the future generations. And in this kind of this idea of a person kind of being personified as the storyteller, that their body in fact becomes the vessel for a story. Like, you know, I can like relate pretty much the plots of everything except for one story, and I think that's actually a really good like hallmark of a good anthology, is that when most if not all the stories stick in your mind, because usually in anthologies it is such a hit and miss. Like there will always be stories that you do not gel with, because there are so many different voices for various like authors. So I think this was a really solid collection.
Yeah, I mean, from a personal point of view as well, I feel as though it might have been a little bit different for me if I'd been reading a physical book, because I know, obviously, through reading stuff over the years, when I read stuff on ebook, it doesn't stick with me in the same way as a physical book. Physical book, somehow I mean, when I read a physical book, I've actually memorized everything I read. I mean, I could.
I think
With ebooks, I don't.
I think with physical book it is the kind of tactile nature of it. Like obviously I read a lot of things on ebook now as well, especially because I got a new e-reader, and it just like I feel like I can still retain a lot of stuff reading digitally. However, I do feel that when you are having the like full-on experience of the feeling, the touch, and the smell of the thing while you are reading, it kind of helps with retention when you're thinking about it. That's why I also really like immersion reading. Like for example, like you have an audiobook, and I know that audiobooks don't work for everyone, but I think that my like favorite method of enjoying an audiobook is to actually follow along in the physical or ebook, that I see the text as I am listening to the story. That helps with the retention. But then again, I also know that sometimes like listening to stuff, like it's very hard to like stay focused on it unless you're like doing something with your hands. Because for me, for example, like listening to an audiobook is impossible unless I have like something like knitting or drawing or something that keeps my hands busy. So yeah, I definitely get that the experience doesn't translate from ebook to physical or audio to physical or audio to ebook in a linear way.
Yep.
But yeah, that's it for us. Do you have anything else to that comes to mind talking about this anthology? And if not, where can people find you and what's coming up next on your channel?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. We've covered all the major things, and like I said, my memory is not gonna sort of be good on the other stories anyway. So we covered the important stuff. As far as we find me, I'm FinalBlowJoe everywhere. My next video is tomorrow, and that is, what day is it? 3rd of April. That's my monthly wrap, actually. I'm quite pleased. I've just managed over the last week. I've been filming in the early hours of the morning almost every day for more than a week, and I've now got videos scheduled to last me until almost my birthday in June. So I've
That
been
is
really
unbelievable. I can barely manage like the most videos I have ever managed to schedule like overall was like 6 videos to last me maybe like a month or month and a half or something, because I'm not as productive when it comes to filming. Um, Speaking of wrap ups, I'm also going to be having tomorrow a March
Yeah.
wrap up live stream. I'm sort of trying out a new format where I'm going to be sort of doing wrap ups as live stream and then focusing on other like more produced content that is more evergreen. So that's going to be happening tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern European Summer Time, so Finnish time. And other than that, I am going to try and film the 25 questions tag. That will also be going up later in April. So with those news out of the way, I will bid you a lovely Saturday and lovely weekend. And me and Joe are gonna go and watch some Arcane.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So bye bye.
Bye
Bye
everyone.
everyone. It was nice having you. And Julia, thank you for joining us for the conversation. Bye bye.